a lot of that is really about the fact that I don't think we talk about this stuff enough. We don't talk about the subtle ways in which we don't include people. Because, like you said, yeah, the men can speak. Nobody's actively hating on them to their face in the scenes. Nobody's telling them leave the room, but nobody's actually taking on board what they're saying either. And that is something that women recognize.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
Any sufficiently arcane magic is indistinguishable from technology.
Nice. I'm Sean.
I'm Daniel.
And we are joined today... No, it's all good. We're joined today by the remarkable R.S.A. Garcia, a Nebula and Sturgeon Award-winning Trinidadian writer of speculative fiction. She has published short fiction venues like Clarkesworld, Uncanny, Escape Pod, Strange Horizons, and she's the best-selling author of the science fiction mystery novel Lex Talionis, which I have and is in a box at the moment, and I do apologize, but I moved. So today we are here to actually talk about, for visual readers at home, The Nightward, the first book in a duology series titled The Waters of Lethe. So welcome to the show, Rhonda.
Thank you for having me, guys.
I'm excited because I have questions.
So before we get to our discussion with you, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us about our show at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions, or you can just send us an email at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. If you aren't already, join us on the Twitch for Sean's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central, and be part of our interactive live streaming format, and then you don't have to just listen to the audio well after the fact of our recording. And finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events that we have on Discord, like our Torture Cinema. So yeah, just for $1, you can torture us as well.
Okay, Rhonda, can you tell us a little bit about The Nightward?
So The Nightward is a sci-fantasy, and it's set in a matriarchal world in which basically a coup happens, and a young bodyguard has to go on the run with his charge, who is the next queen, the princess. And she's a child still, but the throne should pass to her, except that a whole bunch of stuff goes wrong, and the world is not exactly what they think it is. They start out young and desperate and looking for safe harbor, and slowly realize that everything they thought they knew about their world and their lives is probably not the truth. And the reader gets taken on a really, I think, a twisty-turny journey of discovering alongside them things that may seem very familiar and get even more familiar as you go along with things that seem really freaking strange.
Okay, so let's start with talking about, if we can, the politics of the world. Because you mentioned, right, a matriarchal society, and that a coup, this is very early in the story when the coup takes place, so it's not spoiling a whole lot. And I have seen matriarchal societies before in genre fiction, but I found it really interesting that the way that you addressed it came with a lot of curious subtlety, especially when the parents are actually arguing early in the story immediately before the coup. And I feel like this is one of those situations where you could just write a very simplistic political structure, and I don't think you've done that here. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about sort of developing the politics of this world and how you placed it in a story where one of our main perspectives is literally a child who maybe doesn't fully understand the world that she's in.
Yeah. So when I started, I think a lot of what I wanted to do was in response to what I'd seen from other other works, how they depicted matriarchal societies. And I just felt like there has to be more to this than just sexual freedom. You know what I mean? Every time I read matriarchal societies, it was really just, oh, but now I can have a whole bunch of men instead of a whole bunch of women. You know? And I was like, this is not really what women being in charge feels like to me, because I live in the West Indies. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And we are, yes, part of the patriarchy just like everybody else, but also have a very, very strong matriarchal structure to most people's households, which is to say, your grandmother, your mother, your aunts, they are very much the backbone of families. They held things together during the days of enslavement. And going forward, that stayed the same basically. You can depend on women to hold up the household while men go out and, they work, they spread joy, whatever. That's how we say it. But at the end of the day, the kid is your responsibility, education is your responsibility, you know. But we also have this thing where we've been working for generations. Women have worked for generations outside of the home in order to support uh, the home itself and to support the family. So most women work and take care of the kids and do all this other stuff. And I grew up in a family where all the women in my family were basically the head of the household. It wasn't that, dads had no say or that they were disenfranchised or anything like that. It was simply that when it came to big decisions, they made them together or they left it up to mom, and then mom would check in with dad. You know, is this okay with you? You know, and if dad said no, then they'd revisit that, you know, because then mom is usually just checking in with that because mom's not sure. If she's sure, she's not checking in with that, you know? So for me, I was like, why is it that when I see matriarchal societies, it's always about that and it's never about power? It's never about who holds the power and who makes the decisions, you know? And I wanted to present it closer to the way that we know things work, because there are things we take for granted about the way the world is run that we never really put into print. So, yeah, I really wanted it to be subtle and complex because that's how society is, isn't it? It's not simplistic. Every woman on the planet is not oppressed, every man on the planet is not an oppressor, but there is this system wherein people kind of fall into certain roles and they often don't question it. And I wanted to try and see that work in reverse. And how would that affect you if really and truly women felt like they had the power? Things had to bend to their will. What things would be bend and what things would be okay with, and where would the tensions come from? So that's basically why it ended up coming across like that, because I wasn't just interested in let's just map the way that we see power now, which is a very male gaze, onto women, because women actually don't interact with power the same way. And I thought that was something that I hadn't really seen explored, and I wanted to explore that.
That's I noticed a lot of that very thing in the way that you wrote this metrical society, and one of the scenes that's very early in the book that just really hammered in my mind was when uh Viela is looking, she's hiding behind a door and she hears her parents having an argument. And she doesn't fully understand what all of the argument's about. She knows there's things in there she doesn't understand, and she knows the parents are very serious. But we get glimpses of that conversation. And because we're adults, I assume most of us would be able to pick up the very subtle clues and the things they're talking about the change that they're actually trying to build towards to bring this very specific structure, political structure, into a very different political structure, one where power might be more equally shared, which would benefit, of course, of a great range of people, including her brother, the Viela's brother. And so I love that subtlety a lot because it made me think a lot about exactly kind of what you were saying, other portrayals and how it can sort of feel like one of those sword and sandal novels, but now the women are the
Yeah.
ones in power instead. But I also love that you chose this point of view that weirdly made me think of Pixar movies where there's jokes that work for the adults, but they work for the kids too, just very differently. Except this obviously isn't a joke. And so I don't know where that comes from for you, but I was really curious. How do you do that? What's the trick to sort of have things that have multiple layers that mean completely different things to different sort of age audiences?
I think it's something that I practiced a lot. It's something that it's just the way I observe the world too. I've always felt like um, I'm maybe not as good a listener as I would like to be, but I like to observe people, and I like to see how people interact. And I realize that people interact on a lot of different levels. And in this culture in particular, because a lot of it is descended from a place where we would want to be able to speak publicly, but there would be things that we don't want the people who can hear us talking to understand because, uh, apologies and everything. This is just history. You would have your overseer or you would have your white boss, and then you would have your coworker who is a brown person or a person of color like you. And there would be different levels of language and different ways that you speak to each other when your boss is around and when you're not around. And I mean, Americans call this code switching. And here we have Creole, and then there's the English as spoken in school, and then there's Creole, and then there's Patois, which is literally French and Spanish mixed up with English, you know, more heavily French or more heavily Spanish. It depends on which island, But all of those things, from the time I was young, I understood that you can say multiple things with one sentence. You can have multiple meanings underneath one type of body reaction. So there's a thing that West Indians do, and I recently found out Japanese people do it too, and it's called a strips, and we'll just go, and basically for us, it's an expression of, oh, come on. But it's also an expression of, you can't be serious. you know? But it's also an expression of, oh my God, I'm so mad at you right now, I have no words. And context is everything. So I think when I write these things, I am trying to put together the context from the point of view of everybody in that scene so that the person who's reading the scene is understanding, oh, this person thinks this and this person thinks this, but really, this is what's happening, you know? And I always had a lot of fun with that. And I always liked Omni POV and narrator POV, and sort of instinctively had this understanding that your narrator is always part of your work, whether or not you give the narrator a specific voice or whether or not it's a character. There's always a narrator in between even the character that you pick. And I was always fascinated by how people pick that up and they don't even talk about it. And so I said, I wonder how many things I can make people feel or observe while they're talking about something else or they're reading about something else. And I just sort of practiced that over and over and over again.
Have you, by any chance, read Mittelholzer's A Morning at the Office?
I did not read A Morning at the Office, but he is one of my faves forever because I did read My Bones, My Flute when I was very young. And that is one of my favorite horror novels, like forever. He was such a huge Gothic success. I know you have no idea who this is. This is a Guyanese author called Edgar Mittelholzer. And he was one of the biggest Gothic successes in Europe at the turn of the last century. And really, the first best-selling Caribbean author, you could basically say. And he specialized in that sort of horror. But what was great about My Bones, My Flute really was that aspect of it. These people are going into darkest Guyana, to visit a plantation. In this way. And they're all like, oh, let's look upon the exotic plantation. But the plantation is looking back, you know, and it just gets more and more away from them as they stay in this place. They come to realize more and more, oh, wait, this is so not what I meant by a vacation in the bush. you know?
I love
And I
his
love
work
that
a
aspect.
lot. Yeah. Yeah.
He's
I
amazing.
think you would enjoy A Morning at the Office for many of the things we just talked about saying different things to different audiences, because there are characters in that they'll be talking to the boss and they'll use words and you're like, well, but I know when you said that to someone else, that meant something very different. So all these very subtle sort of the politics of the time, which are very interesting. And everybody should read Mittelholzer, though. I think he's great, great writer.
Agreed.
Hey, yeah. Okay, Daniel, I'm sorry. I took up a bunch of time. I'll shut up for a minute.
That's all right. Now I need to look into this author. So, a few thoughts from what was discussed. One kind of touched on one of the things that resonated with me as I read the novel. That the scenes with Viola, but also her brother, really resonated with me, that you write the child's perspective so fantastically well. Because you get that sense of childhood innocence, childhood fear, childhood misunderstanding of things, but also that sort of innocent worldview, that why aren't things a lot more simple? Why do they have to be so complex? What's the big deal? And that is an aspect of the novel I really enjoyed. So that's not a question so much as a comment from what you were discussing. The other, I guess, sort of bridge to what you talked about previously in terms of the matriarchy was I found those scenes interesting in that the men were still offering opinions and stating what they thought, but I never got the sense that there was assumptions that they were the ones that mattered, that their opinions were so again, an observation, I guess, more than a question in that regard. But the one question I would have was within that matriarchy, then the other thing this is decidedly not is like a utopia. It's not saying that matriarchy is necessarily the way that's going to be it's still going to have pitfalls. It's still going to have chinks in the armor and problems that are in some ways like problems that you have from patriarchies of trying to gain power, right? Individuals trying to exert power over others. And so to what degree did you try to balance all those, I guess, those aspects to it to still make it something different, but also something very real?
Yeah, I think my driving force was always to try to be realistic. It's both subtle and realistic because our societies are subtle, and this is the realism that we live with. Is that, for example, and thank you so much for saying that you appreciated the child's POV, because I had a little bit of feedback from people who were like, oh, she's such a disappointment as a queen. She didn't do anything. And I was kind of like, she's
What?
10.
Yeah.
Also, she did stuff, but she's
Yeah.
10.
Uh-huh.
Like, I'm sorry that you watch Star Wars, and I love Princess Leia too, but I'm not trying to, create this fantastical version of, hyper grown-up child here. I wanted to stick to more realism because there's enough fantastical stuff out there. And when
Right.
it came
Yeah.
to the relationships and and interactions, I wanted that to hew more closely to what people recognize in themselves. And I think a lot of that is really about the fact that I don't think we talk about this stuff enough. We don't talk about the subtle ways in which we don't include people. Because, like you said, yeah, the men can speak. Nobody's actively hating on them to their face in the scenes. Nobody's telling them leave the room, but nobody's actually taking on board what they're saying either. And that is something that women recognize, that I don't think a lot of men actually do recognize when it's happening in a group setting, that that's what happens. You think, okay, she's in the room, so therefore she's part of a discussion. But if you think back about what was adopted, what was discussed, and what conclusions you came to, did anything any woman in the room say make it into the final document, make it into that final decision? The answer is usually no, not unless she made a huge scene or she was leading the group to begin with, you know? And that's the kind of thing I was really focused on, because no, I'm really not interested in the idea that one particular gender or one particular type of person is going to cure all our problems by handing over power to them. I was much more interested in talking about the fact that why is it so difficult for us to share? Why is it so difficult for us to acknowledge our own shared humanity and give equal weight? Why do we tend to lean to one side or the other? Why do we assume that someone has to be the person who decides? And why do we pick gender? you know Honestly, what does that add? Because we know why we picked it, right? We figured this was strength. A long time ago, it was easy to say, oh, well, we're stronger, we're taller, you know, me hunt, something like that. But we've also come to realize that our understanding of older societies was actually that's not how they worked. A lot of them did not work like that. We have dumbed down our understanding of our past in order to justify what we do now, you know? And a lot of the book is about talking about that. How much of our past have we dumbed down, erased, written over in order to justify what we want to do now and who we want or who wants to take power now,
And who's been hurt in the process, too.
and who's been hurt in the process, exactly. So those were the things that interested me, why I ended up looking at those things and why it was so important to talk about it from the viewpoint of a child is because they will carry the burdens of the choices that we make.
You've just raised
Sean's getting excited.
I am super excited right now because two of my like little weird bugbears that have happened from watching fictional programs about like medieval times or even deeper into medieval times, right? Like the Middle Ages or even earlier. And you'll see this very thing, like the child thing, for example, where you'll get like a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old who like their dad dies and so they get ushered in because they're the next in line. Well, you're not going to hand over the reins of power to an 8-year-old. They don't know nothing yet. That they just figured out they're not supposed to walk outside alone because people would kill them. Like, so there's always like maybe it's the queen, right? Takes like acts as queen regent, or it is someone else who like takes over that role. And if you're going for some form of realism, of course the people from these times, they just didn't have jet airplanes yet. They weren't stupid.
Exactly. And they understood power, and we were exactly the same kind of humans then that we are now. So why did the path diverge? Why were there some societies back then that were perfectly fine with women in positions of power? And why were they okay with certain types of genders even being acknowledged? And then we somehow ended up here. And no, it's not just all Victorian England's fault. They
Yeah.
can take responsibility for some stuff, but not all of it.
Yeah. I love too that you mentioned, as we learn more and more about older and older societies, our picture of them gets more complicated. Like even the ones where like the men went hunt, right? Well, it's not like that was an inherently more masculine like magic thing. Women could do that, but there were other tasks that were also really difficult that women might have done or that men might have done in some cases. Or if you go to some indigenous cultures, right, we sometimes refer to as like two-spirit, and there are other names for these things depending on the culture, where those roles might have been in some cases more fluid. And so they're not like rigidly enforced the way we imagined. Like it's just a bunch of cavemen running around with sticks going ooga booga, and then like women with, I don't know, braiding hair or whatever the hell they thought they were doing. And so
Exactly.
it's all, yeah, it just feels so simplistic to like map on our contemporary gender politics to cultures thousands of years ago that couldn't. I mean, they had none of this. Like they didn't sit around like they didn't have philosophers and stuff like that arguing like, no, men must be in power, must hunt with stick. Like, just I don't know why they're all cavemen in my mind. I'm sorry.
True. Exactly.
Sorry, I didn't have a question. It's one of my pet peeves. Sorry.
No. It's definitely something that I think about a lot. I really like history. I've always liked history and anthropology and dinosaurs and all of this other stuff. I have this dustbin of a mind in which I put too many things, and then usually too many things come out in my work as well. You can ask my editor. You know? And so when I was working on this and writing this, there were so many iterations. This book had more drafts than anything else I've ever written. And it took longer than anything else I've ever written to sell, to be honest. And it just kept getting rejected because everybody kept saying they had no idea who would buy this. And they didn't just mean the editor, they also meant people. Who's going to buy this? And I was kind of like, well, me, I like it. I have a few friends who like it too, and they read, they write, but it literally took, I think I started shopping it probably around 2015 or something like that, but I actually was writing it from about 2008 or thereabouts. And I think I finished it probably 2015 or thereabouts. And little
Wow.
early pieces of it went up on a workshop that I used to be on called the online writing workshop for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And it's still around today. I call it they call it the OWW. When I was putting it up then, a lot of people were like, "Why do the women have all this power, though?" you know? Yeah, they were just like, "But that's not even realistic." Like, and I love this guy who came and was like, "It's totally realistic. If you've got magic to kick my ass with, yeah."
They
You
do
know?
know that there were matriarchal societies like in history, right? Like
I
we didn't
think a
invent
lot of
them.
people don't
Probably
know.
not. No.
I think a lot of people don't think that. And I also love that the fact that a lot of people don't think about the fact that we're not interested in protecting women, for example, when it comes to slavery, are we? Because when we enslave people, the women get to work right alongside the men, and the children get to work right alongside the adults. And nobody's ever going, "Oh, no, the women just can't do this. It's too heavy. They can't lift that. They can't carry this." No, they have to lift and carry the exact same stuff the men have to lift and carry. And no one's interested if your back hurts or if you fall down when you do it, you know? So all of that, of course, I learned all of this in school. They teach us this because of how our country was formed. From the time you're in primary school, you learn about how sugarcane was made. You learn about how the plantation worked. You go into secondary school as a teenager, and they teach you the stuff that hurts. Because when you're very young, they don't teach you too much of the cruelty. They kind of just go, okay, so they enslaved people, and you're like, that's awful. And you get to secondary school, and they're like, so then they torture you if you, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm only 11. you know, this isn't what my teacher taught me last year. And you realize there are certain things that people take for granted, but they don't apply to everyone. And that was a driving force for me writing this as well. It's like that for lots of things, for all marginalized and oppressed people, genders, whatever. There are certain things that are great for everyone until it gets around to them. Then all of a sudden, those rules don't apply.
So Sean mentioned gender politics before, and you spoke of conversations that we don't have enough. One of the things that I found interesting towards the end of the novel, I don't think it spoils anything to talk about it though, or refer to it, are those conversations that are held over gender politics, sort of from a modern perspective, but also, as Sean mentioned, things that have come up in cultures in the past. And I think you refer to it particularly with the character of Enoch, when the seer is talking to Enoch, what kind of title, what would you like to be referred to? Not what others consider you to be, what do you feel you are? And the use of pronouns. And I don't think I've ever seen it explained with such humanism and so kindly before. And I'm kind of curious, is that something that when you wrote that, is that something coming from your own experience in mind, or is that actually a conversation you've had before with people that have come up in terms of like treating people with dignity of how they'd like to actually be addressed?
I would love to say that it's something that everybody should have grown up with, but it's not. I was lucky. I grew up with parents who, from the time I was very young, they were very focused on teaching me that everybody else deserves the same respect and manners and care. And of course there's also that West Indian thing where children must be seen and not heard. you know so it was always understood that you were the least powerful person in a room and you had to give your respect to everyone else. But as I grew up and I started to learn about things that your parents didn't tell you about the existence of queer persons or persons who don't identify along a gender binary, I was kind of like, why wasn't this in my textbook? Why wasn't this in my school book? Why do we leave these pieces of ourselves out? And then I met friends and made friends, and I have friends to this day who fit into these groups. And it was incredible to me that people were so bothered by what somebody else wanted for themselves. It just didn't make any sense to me that we don't care what our straight boss does in his bedroom, but if you hear someone is queer or gay, you're suddenly consumed with whether or not they're doing it the way you're okay with. You know, everyone else is like, "You don't talk about that," but when it comes to them, it's like, "Oh no, I want to know how that works. Are there children involved?" You know, it's ridiculous. You know, it was partly, I think, just reading and interacting with persons who've had to experience that. Um, Online taught me a lot. You know, in the early days of Twitter, before it became a troll farm, I met so many people who were discovering themselves and figuring it out as they went. And then you were emailing people, you would meet in writers groups and you'd make friends. And then over time they would come to say, you know, this is how I am, this is how I feel. And it was always like, oh my God, I feel so honored that you trust me with this. Because I know this is a difficult conversation to have. And you don't have it with someone who's going to say, oh, get away from me. I don't want to hear that. I don't agree with that. I think this is awful or whatever. For me, comes down very simply to we are all human beings. There is only one race, the human race. Every single one of us has the right to self-identify. Nobody ever questions that. Nobody walks up to someone who is straight and says, I'm going to call you Jack. We literally walk up to someone and say, what's your name? And we're all fine with that. But all of a sudden, we're supposed to feel like hurt, upset, mad because somebody also added, and I'd like to be she, you know, or I'd like to be referred to as them. You know, what is the big deal? What is the difference between that and a name? You know neither of those things until the person offers it to you. So if they're offering it to you, why are you refusing some and not the rest? Do you think this person is incapable of understanding themselves? Do you understand them better than they understand themselves? You know, for me, that was always the human perspective on it. It was just someone telling me who they are is normal. That's what people do. You don't know who someone is until they tell you. So if someone comes up to, it just
Mm.
made sense to me that if you don't know a person, you're going to say to them, what's your name? How would you like me to call you? Because we don't walk up to every woman we meet and say, I'm going to call you Mrs. Smith. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And then when she says, well, actually, I'm not Mrs. Smith. What do you mean? You look like a Mrs. Smith. You look fine to me. You're Mrs. Smith. Why is that a problem? Are you triggered? You know, it makes no sense. So I
It's
think
like the
that's
Yeah.
Monty
why
Python
I
skit.
talk about it. Yeah.
Can we call you Bruce? It'll make it simpler. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what really was. It was very much intentional. I wanted to talk about that because I do believe that women have a tendency to be more open to that because we've been talked over so much and we've been told who we are so much and we've been made to feel like it doesn't matter who we are or what we say so much that I do feel that we're a little bit more open to hearing people when they say who they are or who they want to be because we've suffered trying to be who we are and who we want to be. Which does not mean every woman on the planet is like this or is open. It just means that on average, we're more likely to be less threatened by that.
So could I take us a step into a somewhat silly question?
Please, I feel like I've been weighing down the
We've been
talk.
serious.
I just
No.
didn't want to ruin the moment because if the cover of the book did not clue you in, there are very large cats that you can ride in this, cat creatures. And I have many logistical questions for how that works because I don't know how I would convince my cat Winston if he were large enough to kill me in one fell swoop to allow me to ride him. But that's neither here nor there. There's something about writers and cats, and so I'm kind of curious where did the giant cat thing for you come in? Why? What's the deal?
So first off, like many 80s kids, I saw He-Man and I wanted my own blasted cat. So that's number number
hold,
one.
well, hold on, Daniel. Do you have a He-Man toy right next to you at the moment?
I have. Oh yeah, I've got. Well, we've
You
got
know,
Panther.
100, right? So this is the coolest thing in the now. Number two, you know you are the boss of all bosses if you can get a cat to let you ride it, right? Right? But also, like cats are like ultimate killing machines. And so, not to like spoil too much here, but obviously they're not really like 100% organic, ordinary cats. You know, these are bred differently. They're bred for purpose. So it's not a matter of I'm gonna go out, hold myself a tiger, and throw a saddle on it. You know, if the coloration doesn't tell you this is not your grandmother's pet, you know, the link that they have with their riders is probably part of that as well. And I also really feel like yeah, it was just freaking cool as hell. So you know, there's lots of metaphors I could say and stuff about it as well, but it was something that came to me out of the id, and then you sort of work your way back. You know, it's like I just want it to be cool, and also cats are cool, and also they're good killing machines. If I could make killing machine cats, that would be awesome. You know? And then you kind of go down that road, and you end up with killing machine cats.
Okay, but then you also have horse characters as well.
Yeah,
At least
because
two very, very good horses. And there's still characters that want to ride a regular horse, too. So I like that there's
girls
room.
like horses.
There's room for both things. There's room for killer cat riding, and there's room for regular, everyday horse riding.
I think every girl on the planet loves horses at some point or the other. We all want to ride horses. You know, we all want to, you know, and that was one of my biggest things growing up. And I really do see them as, how do we put it? It's also a callback to your epic fantasies. So much of the novel is a callback to epic fantasies that didn't really include people like me when I was growing up and I was reading them. So some of the touchstones are there for us to go, ah, yeah, you know, let's ride a very good horse across the land, you know. And then some of the touchstones are there because you were an 80s child, and then some of the touchstones are there because this is what you want to talk about, this is what is important to you, you know. A novel is so many different things working together all at once, and you're just trying to keep all those balls in the air and not miss any when they come down.
I do love that you have this. You mentioned before, right? The connections that the writers have to their giant killing machine cats that are in this, which does add a very interesting dynamic because, like, if you know cats, some breeds of cat can get like very particular about the humans they will allow near them. And so there are some breeds that are like equal opportunity. If you've got food, I love you. And then there are cats where it's like, no, this is my human. I will only allow you within touching distance when that human's not present. If you try to touch me, I will bite you. And so there is this element there that I find really, like with Luca in particular, right? Right from the beginning when we get to meet his cat, his giant killing machine cat. That's not what they're called in the book, but that's basically what they are. And like immediately there's that really powerful connection that even Viela like picks up on, right? How close that connection is. And it is simultaneously, right, really terrifying because you're putting an enormous amount of trust into a creature that could kill you instantly. But because of that relationship they have, that trust is like deeply held. They both must trust each other because otherwise this relationship doesn't work. It becomes someone trying to control a thing that could eat you, essentially. And so I found it simultaneously really freaking cool, as you said, but also weirdly very realistic in a very interesting way. There's like a cat ecology or something going on there.
Yeah, definitely. When I put that together, it's because I have cats, and cats pick you. You don't pick cats. You know?
Yep.
You can pick a dog. I loved dogs. I was a dog person for most of my life. And then I went to visit my boss in Canada, and I stayed at her house for a few days, and she had a cat called Guanapaka, which is Swahili for, uh, I think she said it's Swahili for daddy, big daddy, or whatever. Or I can't remember. But the whole point was Guanapaka decided that I was his person. I had never even liked a cat before this, and this cat decided to sleep in my lap, follow me around, sleep in my bed, you know, and in 24 hours made me his bitch. So I was just like, after that, I was like, how do they actually work? Because I understood dogs, but I'd never really asked myself how cats work. And so when I started planning the book, I knew I wanted to mirror, I wanted also to put Luca, the character of Luca, I want to talk about somebody who was open to trusting, open to learning, open to things not being in his control, and to cooperation. And so I felt like that kind of a bond would teach him what it is he needed to do to be the kind of person who would do the things he would have to do throughout the novel and throughout the story. Because, of course, men are socialized a certain way, the women are socialized a certain way. And even though it's not as hard and fast as, your typical epic fantasy slash realistic, patriarchal society today, there were expectations for everybody and how people work. And Luca is one of that rare thing. He's a male soldier, and most of the women you meet in the book are warriors, but magician warriors, women warriors, and they don't have a lot of patience for him because he's basically a grunt, you know. His magic is limited. The best thing he has going for him is his ability to form this trust bond with this creature that the women have no time to form a trust bond with because they're not trusting it like that. They don't have to because they can do things on their own, so they prefer to form a bond with a creature who is reliable, like the horse. They don't want something that's going to be like, hey, today is not the day for me to go out there, and you're just going to have to deal with that. I am not feeling it. They want somebody who's going to go where they go and do what they're told and stuff like that. And so that was the thought process behind it. When I really went into it, I was like, he's going to need to be somebody special. And so is whatever it is working with him. But there's a whole backstory to that and to the Degans themselves, the cat killing machines. There's a whole backstory to that, why they are the way they are, and why people like Luca are able to form that bond and work with them as opposed to control them. But we'll get into that in book 2.
So a segue from that, perhaps you'll go into this more in book 2 as well, but there's other creatures in the novel, of course, that are more on the monstrous side of things, that are also still killing machines, but very evil killing machines. And I know at least one of them is from Caribbean mythology or Caribbean folklore, the Douin.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's how the Douin is pronounced, similar to if it were a French pronunciation, I guess. But I'm curious, are the others as well? Or are they your own? And why do they exist in this world? Will we learn more about, why would you create something like that to, be around, be here, present, in this world? But also, before you answer that, I do also want to make the point that you mentioned a few times tangentially horror. And I love there are a few moments in this book that are kind of they're very few, they're fleeting, but they are very wow, this is really shocking, or this is a moment of pure horror. And as a horror fan, I actually really love those brief moments. So I'll shut up now and let you respond.
First off, thanks for saying that. No, do not shut up. Thanks for saying that. I love horror as well. I've written dark fantasy, written a few horror things. Stephen King was the person who made me decide to become an author, honestly. And so those moments are intentional and genuine because I do feel like most of my work has some really dark things in it so that you can get through them to the light. because that's how my life has been. I think that's how most people's lives are. We don't really have a smooth, sunny, shiny path for most of our life, and there are dark moments and there are truly horrible moments that, when you go over them, you think, that doesn't happen regularly. And anybody else would probably be broken in half by what I went through. So it was important to me in all of my work. I reflect these things. I just don't want them to become necessarily the point of the book, just the darkness, but the struggle more than anything else. Yes, thank you for noticing some of the monsters are in fact inspired by Caribbean mythology. Dwen, the Dwen is definitely one of them. And there's also one of the viewpoint characters is a fairy maid, basically, from Tobago, which is a Tobagonian version of a mermaid. So you'll recognize her. She's early in the beginning of the book, and she goes right through to the end. But the Tobago version of a mermaid has nothing to do with the Western version of a mermaid. As you can tell, physically, they're described differently. When they come on land, fairy maids have hooves instead of feet. And they really, really hate humans. And they hate human men most of all. So they come across human men, they tend to eat them. So,
Sometimes.
and the funny thing is that there are male fairy maids, and they have the exact opposite reaction. They love human women. They get with them like a kelpie, and they get them pregnant, but then they come back and take the kid. So basically both sides are using humans. And the story of Tobago is that Tobago is this beautiful island, and that fairy maids come there to get together, to have fun, to pick each other as lifetime partners, and of course to pick up women, to impregnate and continue on the species, or men to eat. You know? It's like where the Fat Center for them is basically the backstory there. And I have always been fascinated by Caribbean folklore and Trinidad and Tobagonian folklore, especially. And it's been inspired by a lot of mythology from around the world. There's a lot of similarities between some of the people we have, like our in the book to come, you will meet my version of what you guys would probably call a vampire, but we call sukuya. And a sukuya is a woman who's made a deal with the devil to live forever. In exchange for that, she does evil and sucks people at night. You can tell a sukuya has been by if you're lethargic and sluggish, and they find the two, you know, holes in you, usually in your toe or your feet, from where she has sucked your blood. The difference is that a sukuya sheds her skin before she goes off looking for her victims and becomes this ball of fire that floats through the night looking for her victims, you know. And so in order to defeat her, she has no physical body, so there's no staking. You have to find that skin and make sure she can't put it on again before night. You know, I just found these to be so fascinating, the different takes that we have, the way the stories change because they brought us over. Because basically, Adwen is a bush baby from West Africa. We're like little demigods. They're mischief making people. Brazil also has a version of them that they call a bush baby as well. You know, when I was growing up, I would read all these mythologies from all around the world, and I found them so incredibly inspiring and interesting and creative. And so I made some of my own monsters up, and then I also made some of those monsters were my version of what they might be if they were realistic. But the backstory of Island, which is where the Nightward is set, is the explanation for why there are these monsters and why people are there. Is because by the time you get to the end of the book, you realize that Guyland isn't necessarily what Guyland thinks it is. It isn't necessarily some medieval country/planet. It may in fact be something else altogether that's going on, and the people and the creatures there may not even be endemic to it.
Little scary.
We didn't put up spoiler walls, but the funniest line in the novel is definitely the one that ends near the end. Shit, the man said, "What the fuck happened here?"
Yeah.
I burst out laughing when I read that, and I was like, "Yeah, that would probably be my reaction to this."
I changed that line twice, original, and then that was the last version. It was like just before I sent off my final draft. I was like, I saw the book in a whole different when I was like, that's not the line. This is the line. This is the line. This is
This is
gonna
the line.
like
Yes.
bring home the terror and the humor and the exhaustion and the what the hell did I just read?
And so I don't know if we want spoiler walls or if this counts, but just in case you're very hesitant as we near towards the end of spoiler wall to ask, do you consider this fantasy, sci-fi, science fantasy,
Yeah, I always
all of
sold it
the
as a
above,
sci-fi.
or
Yeah, I always sold it as a sci fantasy, especially this version of it. I do think like book two will probably be much closer to science fiction than
Mhm.
fantasy because we're still
Yeah, I could
following
say that.
everybody, but there are
Right.
elements that come in at the end of book one, and as we explore those elements in book two, you begin to see, oh crap, it's a whole different take on it. And I kind of always enjoy doing that with my fiction. I'm sorry, I'm one of those awful people who start my stories in one place, and at the end of the story, you, the reader, everybody in the story is in a completely different place. And you, if you go back to the beginning and read it over, you should have a completely different experience this time and be like, oh, wait, I didn't see that the first time around. Oh, crap. That was out in the open. I missed that. You know, I didn't read it that way the first time around. It's something that I like doing, like I said, because I like the idea of layering complexity so that people understand and they see different things as they come to it from different places or even as different people. Like I've had people comment, like one bookseller in England, I think it was, said something, it's barely Caribbean. And I almost died laughing because first off, how would you know? Second off, as somebody who is from the Caribbean entirely, never lived anywhere
Yes.
else, people from the Caribbean have been like, holy shit, there's so much in jokes in this book. You know? But that's stuff that we would know. I'm not necessarily writing to the gaze to clue every single person in, but it's there for the people who will get it. And in the same way,
Right.
people who love epic fantasy will see the callbacks and be like, oh, epic fantasy callback, I get this, I love this. And the people, hopefully, who like science fiction will see things and be like, oh, shit, yeah, that makes sense, you know? And yeah, so I've always thought of it as a science fantasy series, but it leans more toward the fantasy in the first book and a little more toward the science in the second book.
That makes sense.
Well, we're getting close to the end, and since we're talking about stuff that's coming next, that naturally leads to a very perfect question, which is, what exactly are you working on next? I believe, didn't you announce something on Blue Sky at the time of this recording?
Yes, actually, a new novella is out. I have a new book out today. It's called The Unbearable Taste of Fruit and Wine. It's from Android Press. It's available wherever your retailers are, you know, whoever you buy your books from, you should be able to get it. And again, although this one very much reads like a fantasy, this one is set in a post apocalyptic magical world where basically um, there was a fight between some new gods and old gods, and the old gods lost. You know? And that's just the background, really, for the story of this unusual woman named Iris, who has spent her life in service to an archmagus. And he used to fight in that war. And now he devotes his time to collecting really powerful artifacts that survived the war so that he can grow his power. And Iris assists him with that because she has a particular special power ability that he finds useful in finding new artifacts. And basically, she steals stuff for him on command. And one day she goes to do what she normally does and runs into a very charming thief, and he upends everything she thinks she knows about herself and her family and the world she lives in. And it's actually reads very much like fantasy. And I do plan some sequels, though. It really is more of a science fantasy because I can't help myself. I hate boxes.
And then, do you have an idea for the second book of the duology?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm working on that as we
Okay.
speak. It should, to be very honest, I have the greatest editor in the world because it should have been turned in earlier this month. But I wasn't well at all last year. Um, I've been battling breast cancer for a few years now, and it's going well, but we have complications and you run into problems. And I was sick for most of last year. Didn't really get where I would have hoped to get. I have wordage of a book, but the book isn't done. You know? And so I also have to go in for surgery because of that in a few weeks, actually. So that sort
Oh.
of put the kibosh on finishing the book in time. So I'm working on that, hoping to be done with it in a few months, but it all depends on how surgery goes and how quickly I recover. And I'm also working on a sequel for The Unbearable Taste of Fruit and Wine. Definitely planning some sequels. It's a strange little hodgepodge of, things I liked about Greek mythology that most people don't really focus on because I'm not writing about the big gods. And also just my love of weird, quirky, slightly romantic, sort of, how do you put it? Odd fantasy, then. A sort of dreamy, sort of surreal, softer, more intimate fantasy than what I'm doing in the Nightward. You know, it's much more, it's much smaller stakes and a lot more romantic, although it's basically slow burn or whatever, no spice, I think is what they call it. You know? But I have a lot more stuff planned in the universe, so hopefully people will like that. And then there's a string of novellas I've been doing on Clarksville since I think 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. Set in a future West Indian futureverse that started with The Sun from Both Sides. And then my Mifri Award winner, Philia Eros Storgi Agape Pragma, and then Bishop's Opening, which was nominated for a Nebula. And I am working on another story in that universe that hopefully will tie all those other three stories together. And I, at the end of that, hope that I can put them all together in one collection
Ooh,
so
that
that
would be
people
great.
can see a whole picture of the whole thing. That's one of the very explicitly West Indian things I've done. So that was a
Nice.
lot of fun putting that in the far future. Whereas, Nightward is like probably also far future, but also like fantasy. It's like backward and forward at the same time.
And if I'm correct, I found I had the link I put into chat, but there is a GoFundMe for you for some of the expenses of your medical care. And so I have put that in the chat, and I will put that in the show notes for folks that are getting this later. But you can also go to Rhonda's social media to find those things as well, because this stuff ain't cheap, um, to
Yeah.
say the
Thank you
least.
so much.
Yeah,
We
you're
Yeah.
hope the
welcome.
surgery goes well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Nervous as hell. It's a lot of procedures all at once. So I'm just praying everything goes good.
We hope for the best. Hopefully it goes real quick, and as record time, they're like, wow, this was the easiest one we've ever done. Everything's perfect.
That is my hope, definitely. It's I've been waiting for the surgery for a couple of years because COVID kind of messed everything up. So hopefully with this surgery, a lot of the really bad side effects I've been having might be alleviated.
Okay. Well, I hope for every single good outcome that is possible from this for you.
Thank you, thank you.
I am one
So for
of
folks,
those that is
oh, go
like
ahead. Sorry.
sorry. I'm one of those that's like eagerly awaiting the next book now. But I'm glad your editor's being patient with you as well, because I'm sure the readers will be patient as well, because you need to do what you need to do. And as much as, we're eager to read more adventures. Yeah. We
Yeah, thank you.
understand.
He has been great. He has been great, and he's actually told me he'll publish it whenever it's ready.
Wow, that is really nice. Okay.
Yeah. And it took
That's
a
great.
huge load off my mind because it really was incredibly stressful trying to put out two novels and edit and market and write. And then also last year was such a great year for me. I did not expect it, but it also meant that I traveled for the first time in a long time. And so there was all of that pre-travel stuff, and then you're traveling for like a month, and then you get home and you crash, you know, because you used up all your health bars. You know? So it
Well,
was kind of like God, thank God that I'm working with understanding people.
Well, for folks that would like to find you and like your things, where would be the best place for folks to go?
I'm definitely more on Blue Sky these days. So R.S.A. Garcia, Blue Sky Social. I do have a presence on Mastodon, R.S.A. Garcia, and I have a website, rsagarcia.com as well.
So, folks, make sure to go buy the Nightward and also literally everything. The Unbearable Taste of Fruit and Wine, which is out today. Which by the time you get this at home, it'll be out, and you can buy it from Android Press. We'll have links for everybody. But Rhonda, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was wonderful. I had a lot of fun.
We enjoyed
We
it.
had
Thank
fun
you.
too. Thank you very much. So, folks at home, if you'd like to let us know what you thought about the episode, if you've read Rhonda's work, perhaps, and want to send us all of the good, positive vibes, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. You can also send suggestions and whatnot there. You can also join our Discord and get free episodes and other kind of things by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. And we are also all over the internet: Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, and a bunch of other places. All those links can be found at skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings, which includes our newsletter and other stuff. And don't forget that literally right now, we are recording live on the Twitch thing at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams, which takes place every Friday at 7 p.m. Central, except when one of us is on vacation and then like nothing's happening. Sorry, just gonna have to deal with it. So please come find us. Tell your friends about us, join us for our live show, review us on all the things, and I don't know, like give us like $8 of your dollars. Oh, and I guess me. I'm at SeanDuke.net. I'm Sean Duke on most places. You can just go to SeanDuke.net/Duke things, and you'll find all of my socials. And I'm also Alphabet Streams on Twitch, which is where Skiffy is. So, yeah.
And you can find me, Daniel, at Reading 1000 Lives. That's 1000. Reading 1000 Lives on Blue Sky, and then that's also my blog review site. But of course, I also have reviews on Skiffy and Fanty's blog. So if you're a listener to the show but don't regularly peruse the blog, you should do so, because our blog team, they put up amazing things.
Okay, as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, we are going to make it happy this year, because not awkward, all happy things. And so if everybody would look underneath their chair right now, there is a box with a kitten in it. Oh my God, oh, there's kittens everywhere. Just pretend that that's true. And if not, well, then it's on its way. You'll have a kitten very soon. Hypoallergenic kittens, just to be clear, in case you have allergies. And on that note, happy ending and scene. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.